sorry, we're recording already.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Welcome everybody to today's general meeting of the Region 14 Upper Rio Grande Flood Planning Group. For the record, it is 9:04 a.m. So welcome everybody. And so at this time, I'd like to recognize any guests that are here with us. I know we have a group of consultants, we have the TWDB staff, we have members. Anybody here that's new to the group? Okay, hearing none. Let's move on to item number 3, member updates. Does anybody have anything interesting to share today? Okay, we have a pretty packed agenda, so let's move on to the next item, number 4.
Let me make a comment if I can. I had mine muted on. The Marfa Public Forum, do we need to provide any input at this point that indicates what happened there? And I made some notes on that, and the key things were that old flood maps were out of date, and many of the people had 15-year-old flood maps, and there was a lot of discussion about LIDAR and whether that might help or not. But local community access, Gary brought up local community access to updated state level flood maps, and there's a lot of discussion about whether those maps could be made available and help these guys out with flood mapping that seems to be real far out of date. That seemed to be the main emphasis. So that's about all I need to say about it.
I know that interim attorneys was also on the was at the meeting as well. Interim attorneys, was there anything else you would like to add to that?
Well, because we had Richard from the TWDB and the consultants on board, I assumed we were going to talk about it a little bit later. But the one thing I want to add is that the region is hard pressed to get the data they needed to be able to, and the funding they need to be able to build any flood infrastructure necessary for the region. They spoke about an unfortunate death that happened during a flash flood. And so we're hoping that AECOM can give them a lot of the information they need to be able to, prevent these kinds of incidents in the future.
All right. Well, then I think perhaps it might be discussed later in the meeting as well. Dave, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I didn't realize we were going to bring it up later. I would have waited.
Okay. Well, I'm not. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So I think it's completely fine for you to have started the discussion.
The only other thing I did see in there, Sal brought up discussion about the levees not being recognized yet by FEMA also, and that was probably pretty significant for a lot of this area here.
Yeah, I was going to mention that I did not see none of that in the minutes.
Well, it won't be in the minutes that you saw now because those aren't minutes of that meeting. So.
Okay.
How do we document what happened there? Does the verbal conversation simply document it, or is there some other mechanism that AECOM used to document that meeting?
We will have. I'm trying to remember if I have that meeting. We do have the meetings on our YouTube channel, so they can be viewed. We did have a discussion, Richard and I, in terms of whether that does require minutes or not. So I can go ahead and get started on those minutes to reflect what occurred.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Any other updates? Okay. Hearing none, let's move on to item number 4, review and approve the minutes of the meeting held on May 20, 2021. And so at this time, do we have any feedback or comments or corrections that you need for the minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as they are.
Motion to approve from Dave.
I second that, Gisela.
Okay, for the first and second, all in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Item number 5, update from the Texas Water Development Board.
Hi all, this is Richard Bagans from the Texas Water Development Board. Just want to say welcome to the meeting again, and it was such a pleasure to meet some of you guys out in Marfa for the pre-planning meeting that we had. I thought there was some great attendance from the public, more than expected, and I thought some really great issues were raised. The updates that I have, I guess the biggest update that you guys might have seen a blast about is that the legislature appropriated additional funding, approximately $10 million, that may become available after September 1st. And so we sent out a survey out to all of the regions. We received the surveys back from all of the regions, and we're processing all those responses, and we'll be working with our upper management to figure out a way how to allocate those funds to meet all the region's needs. So in the next couple months, we'll be working with the sponsors to execute contract amendments to incorporate those additional funds once they become available. So thank you all for giving your feedback. Everything was read thoroughly and considered. And so that is in the works and moving. No other real big updates from the TWDB other than one other thing that occurred is the building data sets. I think thank Brian from AECOM pointing out some of the data errors that the buildings data sets had, as well as a better data set, building data set is about to be released based on LiDAR data. And so for the consultants, keep an eye out for that. There's, I believe, email blasts notating that around mid-August, the new building data set layer should be published. So keep an eye out for that. That's all the TWDB updates. Does anybody have any questions for me right now?
I do, Richard. This is
Yes.
Gisela. Okay, so on the additional funds that were approved, I know you guys are gonna meet to see how you're gonna allocate it, but is this for additional funding for these contracts that are in place or that are gonna be taking place, or is it for new contracts, or what is it for?
Right. So they are planned to be amending the current contract with Rio Grande COG, though I'm not 100% sure on the details whether or not it goes, if AECOM has the manpower to do it, or if additional consultants need to be brought on board to perform it as well. So there may be an additional procurement process if additional hands are needed. I'm not 100% sure on that. That is still to be determined at this time.
Okay,
Richard, Dave, what
Yes,
portions of all of the task lists have been funded to our contractor?
The contractor has received a $200,000 advance to cover invoices of tasks worked on currently. But until those tasks are worked on, it's a reimbursement payment schedule. So they're not getting funds until the work is completed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wondered, is $200,000 expected to fund task 1's 2 and 3. 1, 2A, 2B, 3. I mean, how far down the list is that expected to fund?
Yeah, right. And so it's only expected, to be honest, it's not expected to fund all of those all at once, because we know that they're going to be coming in spurts. So every couple months we expect invoices to come in, and we'll keep reimbursing as the work is being done. I forget the totals for tasks 1, 2, 3.
And Dave, I can send out the task budget so you can see how that was devised by AECOM, so you can see how much money is dedicated to each of these functions.
Okay, I'm just, my agenda, I guess, is to try to figure out what's been funded and what hasn't been funded based on suspenses that would normally have been due already based on that conceptual schedule that was put out originally. And we're a couple months behind that now. So that's why I'm kind of asking about what's been funded and what hasn't been funded, so I can understand what they should be working on and what kind of drafts we should be seeing when. So
I think
that's kind of what I'm getting to here.
Yeah, no, definitely. In terms of what's been funded, I mean, all the funding available, the $1,021,800 of the total amount received to the COG is going to AECOM, and it's funding the tasks. So I think that once we get into the agenda items from AECOM to talk about 1 and 10, you'll get a better picture to see how they're doing on that. But in terms of their allowability, they're ready to go. I think what Richard's just mentioning is that there's going to be additional monies now. They're going to be available on top of that to continue the functions.
Yeah, but if you can send us the task order so that we can see the allocations, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What was the additional contract potential for that was discussed a minute ago?
So the legislature appropriated additional funds this past cycle that may become available after September. And so the general maybe idea behind it was seeing if there's additional funds, how can it best help the regions? One of the major ideas was, if we have all these FMEs, all these studies that need to be done, can we fund some of these studies to be completed to identify some more FMSs or FMPs? And so that's just one core idea. There's other smaller ideas for the regions, but that may, if FMEs are to be completed, the contract might be extended a year, and there might be an amendment to the regional plan a year later with the incorporation of these completed FMEs.
Okay, thanks.
All right. If there's no other questions, then I am done. Thank you all.
All right. Item number 6, update from liaisons from both Region 15 and Region 14. So Vanessa or Sarah, whoever wants to go first.
Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I have sent Annette some notes that I took the last meeting of the Region 15 RFPG. And essentially what Commissioner Garza talked about, what they want to focus on is really filling in the gaps that they have in the data collection by increased community outreach. So they had half an associates there who is their consultant, and half is focusing on gathering all kinds of input from the community and from stakeholders. They also talked about the data sharing that is occurring between the GLO's regional flood studies and our RFPG efforts. So the flood studies doesn't overlap with Region 14. unfortunately. So, they're not collecting data for this area, but the flood studies is gathering data for the Gulf Coast area, and that includes the lower Rio Grande Valley. So that's what they discussed. Sorry, let me look at my notes more. They discussed, they had some, they're also focusing on their comment period. What else is important? I think that's about it. Does anyone have any questions?
And I'm going to forward the notes right now.
Yeah, sorry about that, y'all. I figured I'd just let you read the notes and not take up too much time.
And Javier, for some reason, I'm getting yours kicked back to me, so I'll send you this one separately.
Oh, actually, one more thing I did want to mention from that meeting. Commissioner Garza also mentioned the importance of pre-planning meetings for the upper, mid, and lower regions. So there might be some collaboration with them in the future on that. Thank you.
By the way, Annette, I'm not sure if Javier already shared this with you, but he's now settled in at a different employer. So he has a brand new email.
Yes, and I do have that email.
Oh,
we
okay.
did have this discussion. Maybe it doesn't like to be on distribution lists, so I'll figure it. And then another item. I'm not sure if Vanessa is on the call, but she is now with TxDOT. So there's so Vanessa's not on the call. She said that she still wants to be. At this point, she's still part of Region 15, and she would still like to stay as a liaison as well.
I think that's fine and good for her. Hopefully she moved up and is in a better place. All right. Item number 7, then let's move on. ACOM.
Okay, and so Gilbert, do you want to take over controls of the meeting now? Oh, you're muted.
I was on mute. So yeah, let me transition that over. So Brian, do you want to go ahead and share your screen with us?
Sure.
Alrighty. Thank you, Annette. No more. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gilbert Andujo. I'm the project manager, and I'm out of the El Paso office. And today we're here to provide a status on the ongoing Region 14 Upper Rio Grande Regional Flood Plan. Before we get started, I just want to introduce the AECOM team members that are on the call and that are assisting with this particular update. We've got Jeff Irvin, who's our QA QC for modeling and planning. We've also got Chris Wright, which is a deputy project manager and project planner. He will be handling tasks 1 through 5. We have Brian Blaisdell. Again, he's another deputy project manager assisting with tasks 1 through 5. We also have our public relations team, Barracuda, on. They will be handling the public relations and outreach. And those members are Marina Monsivais and Martin Bartlett. With that being said, let me go ahead and turn it over to Chris to begin this update. Chris?
Thanks, Gilbert. Brian, you could go ahead and move to the next slide. So I just, we're going to try to keep the presentation to about 15 or 20 minutes today and open it up to questions at the end. We will pause at the end of some slides. If you do have specific questions, feel free to speak up or let us know before we move on if you like. Like I said, we'll pause kind of in between slides, but then we'll also have an open discussion at the end. And we'll start out just by kind of giving you a general overview of the team, and we'll also talk about the tasks that are necessary as part of the scope of work. We'll then go into a few of the maps with some relevant data that we'll be using in our study. And then we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into tasks 1 and 2, since that's our current focus. Afterwards, we'll touch on the stakeholders and community survey, which we are getting ready to send out in the next couple of weeks. And we'll talk about the general schedule and where we are with that. So lastly, we'll wrap up with the meetings that we plan to have moving forward, the frequency of the meetings, and we'll also talk a little bit about some of the subcommittees that we would like to get set up as soon as this meeting, if possible. So we'll see what can be done as far as getting agreement on what those subcommittees are going to be, and which members might be interested in joining certain subcommittees. So like I said, we'll go through this initial presentation in about 20 minutes, hopefully, and then we'll try to establish some of those subcommittees and touch on the general schedule after that. So that's our plan. I'm showing the org chart right now. This was provided in our proposal. I won't go through every name on this list, but there are multiple sub-consultants which we're using. And as Gilbert mentioned, Martin Bartlett from Barracuda is our public outreach team member and public participation, and they're helping us out with the survey that we're currently working on. But we have specialists from several different areas. These technical advisors shown on the screen are our current team members. There was a slight update from the proposal we submitted. Gabe Duran from USIBWC was on the team, and recently we have had a change. He's no longer on the team, and in his place we've added Susan Roth, who will be doing sort of independent QA/QC of the whole process of the planning process, and really kind of general overall ITR. Will be meeting with her on a regular basis. She's involved in 2 of the other flood planning regional teams, so she's a great resource to have, and we look forward to working with her. So without spending too much more time on that, I'll jump into an overview of the outlines of the scope of work outline, what we're trying to accomplish. You all are probably familiar with the scope at this point, but we still just want to touch on generally what we're trying to accomplish as part of this study. So under data collection risk analysis, tasks 1 and 2A/2B is what we're focusing on right now. Just a general planning area description, and like I said, we'll go to a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. And then Brian will talk a little bit more about tasks 2A and 2B later on in this presentation, the existing and future condition flood risk analysis. We'll also be looking at flood management practices and goals. One of our resources for this particular item is going to be the TFMA Higher Standards document. This is a pretty comprehensive document that was produced by the TFMA in 2016 and 2018 based on surveys of communities all across Texas. So that'll be a very valuable resource that we'll use to compare different regions throughout different cities and communities throughout the region, and how they are currently approaching flood management practices. We'll also, as part of task 4A and 4B, we'll be evaluating the information that's available in the region. As we heard in the last meeting, a lot of citizens in the region are concerned about the date of their current floodplain maps, and so that's a big factor to consider, along with the available LiDAR topography, which is a pretty important component of developing floodplain models and maps. So those will be the primary needs and we're very familiar with the El Paso region. We've done a lot of work in that region, and we'll really be relying a lot on the stakeholders in our community survey to provide more information about what kind of local knowledge they have of what's going on in their areas and what information they need. So hopefully we'll get some good feedback from that perspective. And based on the information available, we'll be developing flood management evaluations, FMEs, flood management strategies, and flood mitigation projects, FMPs. And just to kind of summarize, the flood management evaluations are for areas where there might need to be some additional studies before we can develop flood management strategies or flood mitigation projects. One example is the Rio Grande hydrology and estimate of the flows in the Rio Grande it's been a while since they've updated that. And there's some newer climate data, NOAA Atlas 14 rainfall precipitation that could be considered in that. So that's an important part of coming up with successful strategies and projects is making sure that we have the appropriate evaluations in place. So we'll also be relying on a lot of the previous studies that have been done, which AECOM has been a part of a lot of those. And we'll be wrapping up those 4A, 4B, and 4C with a technical memorandum, which will be the first deliverable of the project, which is due in January of 2022. And like I said, we'll touch on the schedule from a high level at the end of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about how we get to that. Task 5, after the TWDB, and of course the flood planning group regional planning group will review that tech memo before it goes to TWDB as a draft to TWDB. After we receive their feedback, we'll move forward with Task 5, which are recommended FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs. And then we'll talk about a summary of impacts. Task 6A deals more with impacts of our proposed projects related to environmental or agricultural aspects, but also we want to make sure that none of our flood mitigation projects make flooding worse in other locations. So we'll be touching on that as 6A, and then 6B we'll be looking at water supply impacts, both from a negative and positive perspective. Projects that have a positive water supply component where it contributes to the water supply and flood mitigation benefits, those will be prioritized in this study. And we also want to make sure if we're using some method that could potentially harm the water supply as part of our flood mitigation projects, we want to make sure to identify those potential impacts in this task 6B. Finally, we'll be wrapping up with task 7, 8, and 9, which will deal with flood responses. And we'll be working with the emergency response teams. We'll be working with some of our sub-consultants on developing potential early warning systems for road closures or responses during flood events as they happen. And we'll also be summarizing everything with administrative, regulatory, and legislative recommendations. So that'll kind of bring everything together. And finally, we'll talk about flood infrastructure financing and potential grants that can be used to fund some of these evaluations and projects moving forward. And Susan Roth will be, a big help, who I mentioned earlier on our team in that regard. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the task 1, the planning area description, we'll just look a little bit closer at this one in particular. And like I said, we'll also dig into task 2 later on. Brian Blaisdell will touch on that. But the regional characteristics, so socioeconomic characteristics, we're going to be using census data for a lot of that. And we'll be looking at the population growth and certain industries that are impacted by flooding. We'll also be looking at flood-prone areas, which will gather that information from our previous knowledge and history of working within the city of El Paso, but outside the city of El Paso, there aren't a lot of studies to go off of. So we're going to be relying a lot on stakeholders in the community feedback that we get. So we're going to be really following up with the stakeholders that we've identified and that we'll be sending this survey to, and trying to work with them to get the type of information that will be helpful. We've even developed a GIS interactive database where they can enter some of the information as shapefiles, GIS shapefiles in the system. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good information there. We'll talk about key historical flood events based on, again, community feedback and any high watermarks that we can get, or pictures from community members that fill out the survey. Even anecdotal evidence is helpful in some of these if there's nothing else to go by. We'll be looking at political subdivisions, which I've got a couple maps after this that will talk about that. Local regulation development codes, I already touched on, the higher TFMA higher standards, but we'll also be reaching out to those communities through phone call or through meetings. We have some roadshow meetings to understand the regulation and development codes. We'll be using for agricultural and natural resources, some sources such as Cropsgate, which provides information about some of the agricultural components that we'll be evaluating. SWCA is on our team, who will help with sort of impacts to agriculture, and as well as impacts to the environment that could be caused by some of these projects, and cultural aspects as well. And lastly, we'll be developing existing local and regional flood plans. So we'll be evaluating and collecting that information for all of the cities and communities. And like I said, we have a really good understanding of that for El Paso. We've developed those stormwater master plans from 2012, and we've helped with the most recent updates to that master plan. So we have pretty good understanding in the city of El Paso, and even within the county. But outside of that, we'll really be relying a lot on the stakeholders and the communities to give us that type of information and that feedback. And then lastly, we'll have to cover a description of the location and functionality of the existing and constructed flood mitigation features, both natural and constructed. Some natural flood features might be some natural low points on mesas or in areas that collect flood waters. So we'll be looking at those, as well as there's a lot of dams in the El Paso region, we know, and even outside of the city limits. So that'll be a big component. Sediment, which we talked about, and we've got a lot of comments on sediment and how we'll be approaching that. So we'll cover some of that in this section. And lastly, the location, source of funding, anticipated benefits, both structural and non-structural. So there's going to be a component where, as I mentioned, Susan Roth will be helping with potential grants and funding opportunities. And a lot of that is going to depend on benefits, which we need to demonstrate from our projects. So we're going to be looking for the best available models where we can show the benefits needed in order to get the funding for those grants and for other sources of income that can help produce real flood mitigation projects from this study. Okay, next slide. So I'll just touch on this quickly. I just wanted to show a quick map of the region, and these are some of the census designated places. One thing I was going to just mention is that the census designated places are defined by laws of the states, and it's more based on population, and the Census Bureau was one of the resources that we used for that. The Census Census Bureau designated these population centers, and so you can see these three main centers. We've got El Paso to the west, and we've got Presidio down to the south, and we've got the Pecos area as well. And these are the main population centers where we'll be focusing, although we will be considering the whole region. But these are sort of spread out in meaningful watershed divides where we think it makes sense to hold different roadshow public meetings in these three locations. So that was part of why we selected these three areas. You can go to the next slide. This is just showing some population growth. This was some information provided by TWDB, and you can kind of see which parts have been growing the fastest within our region, and this will play an important role when we are evaluating future conditions. So that might include future impervious cover. These growth projections are consistent with the state water plan and the population growth that the methods used to estimate population growth in the state water plan. And so we'll be on the same page as their population growth and estimates, and it'll be an important part of this study, because from what we know, there aren't a lot of future land use information available at this time, and there's also haven't been a lot of future climate change studies performed in our area. So establishing those as flood management evaluations is probably going to be a big component of predicting, how we can best prepare ourselves for the future and make sure that the projects that we come up with are considering all those factors. Go ahead, next slide. And then lastly, I was just going to touch on these climatic regions. These came from the climate chapter of the 2012 State Water Plan. And it's actually the National Climatic Data Center came up with these climate divisions. And I mainly wanted to point out that our region is pretty consistent. You can see a large chunk of it is this Trans-Pecos subtropical and desert. And so there's a certain type of vegetation that's in these mountainous areas. And so the current climate is pretty consistent throughout most of our region. However, there is some variation on the eastern side where we have Edwards Plateau and then this small section of high plains to the north. But even though the existing climate is pretty consistent, when you have to evaluate future conditions, Brian Blaisdell has been involved in some of these future climate precipitation studies that deal with climate change. And based on some of the models that are out there, there's a lot of variation as far as what the future climate will be. So I just wanted to point that out, and with that, I'll hand it over to Brian to take us through the next 5 or 6 slides.
All right, thanks, Chris. So in approaching task 2 to identify flood risk and the flood risk across the region, both for existing and future conditions, we'll be leveraging our experience within the region, especially El Paso County, on past projects. Chris mentioned some of those briefly before, including the El Paso Stormwater Master Plan, the original, and as well as the updates, more recent updates. We've also led the El Paso County Master Plan and the Interior Drainage Study, which are recent updates. So we have a lot of those models available to use, and our approach for this task will be primarily to consolidate those models, to use the existing best available information to best identify and represent risk at the regional level. Outside of El Paso County, we'll be relying more heavily on feedback from community representatives and other stakeholders about the types of flood risks they're experiencing and the models that may be available. So in collecting these models, well, I guess I'll also mention too that we're going to be drawing from also projects that have been performed, studies for levee design, dam design, natural valley floodplain analysis, of course, the most recent preliminary 2D analysis done for FEMA in El Paso County, and any CLOMAR or LOMAR studies that have been done. So through the analysis, we'll be overlaying the various flood risks boundaries, and I forgot to mention Fathom as well, which we have Aqua Strategies on our team who's developing the Fathom data set alongside the university in the UK that's leading that methodology. So we can use that as a good way to fill any data gaps where there are no models available, especially in the more rural areas in the region. So once we've identified all these potential models and flood risk boundaries, both for the 1% and 0.2% annual chance flood events, the 100 and 500-year floods, those risk boundaries will be overlaid with the various buildings and roadways and other critical facilities that will identify through this process as well, and we'll be evaluating potential flood exposure to the residential properties as well as the associated population with those, non-residential properties, public and critical facilities, including power generation and industrial facilities. Some of those we've got through data sets provided by the Texas Water Development Board, and we'll also be getting additional feedback from the communities if to fill any gaps in that. We'll be looking at roadway crossings, significant roadway blockages from flooding, including like the length of those potential overlaps, and any neighborhoods that may be isolated in the event of a flood that do not have any other alternative access for emergency routes in a flooding event. And in addition to that, we'll take a look at the agricultural areas and values of crops exposed based on the data sets, the Cropscape data set, and other information from stakeholders, and looking at the expected loss of function from a qualitative standpoint by talking with the stakeholders, understanding what those impacts might look like, and discussing the potential risk from more of a qualitative standpoint across the region. So the vulnerability analysis will also specifically look at those critical areas and those communities that I mentioned before that may need alternate access to emergency facilities in a flood event. So we'll be identifying those vulnerabilities in particular in that step. So looking at the future condition in the interest of becoming more resilient and adopting more more resilient floodplain practices and just better understanding risks throughout the region, we'll be looking at future conditions. And there's, like Chris mentioned, there's a lot of different ways you could look at that. One being the future development and expansion, urban or otherwise, additional impervious cover. And that would be a function of the population growth in the area as well as land use trends. So we'll be looking at that. We'll also be looking at potential ways to incorporate future precipitation trends. So Chris mentioned the NOAA Atlas 14 dataset. That is a recent study that was released to represent existing precipitation trends based on the most recent available precipitation gauges. There have been studies done to sort of utilize that historical record and project outward using the trends from that, in addition to a lot of other climate-based models. One report that was referenced by the Texas Water Development Board in the guidelines is a study by John Nielsen Gammon and Savannah Jorgensen. In this study, they mention they show some variation across Texas regarding trends in the 100-year return values of a 24-hour rainfall event. You'll see in this graph here that for a part of East Texas, there's a fairly uniform trend towards increases in precipitation of about 10 to 20%.
Hey, Brian, I'm sorry. This is Dave Hall. The slides are not keeping up with you.
Oh.
I don't know who's doing slides, but right now we're like 2 slides behind.
Okay, I'm sorry. Which slide are we looking at right now? Is it
I think you're on a map right now that says Region 14, and we're not seeing that.
I'm seeing the task 2 flood analysis, flood risk analysis existing future.
Yeah, you're 2 slides behind. There you go. Now the next slide's the one I think you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know if you need me to pause and slow down to let the slides catch up. Apologize for that. So yeah, this is the map that I was referring to. This came from the climate-related study. This is looking at the historical trends from the NOAA Atlas 14 data, and it's summarized by the state climatologist. And you'll see here that in the east part of Texas, there's a fairly uniform trend from that data set towards increases in precipitation, whereas the further west you go in the state, there's a lot more variation, especially in Region 14, where some areas you see higher increase in rainfall. Near the El Paso, New Mexico border, and then kind of further east, it's we're seeing decreases potentially. Or these are increases and decreases in like extreme rainfall events. So we may look into that potential explanation for those variations and understand how to apply this for our particular region. One way that was recommended in that study was to apply kind of a simple increase in percentage to the runoff that was based on assumed values and percent increase in precipitation for those areas that may be applicable. The idea being, as if temperatures increase in the future, as they're projected to do, every degree increase in climate can result in an increased moisture carrying capacity of the atmosphere, which then leads to higher potential for extreme events. So with that in mind, we'll want to consider that in addition to like the future development considerations. And the timeline for that will be kind of a 30-year projection for the population growth. So we'll be looking at these sort of extreme cases to understand those better and decide strategically where to apply them, and using some simplified assumptions to apply those to the existing available models. All right. So looking at the data sets that show the Texas Water Development Board flood quilt, in our region, the primary sources of this flood quilt include a preliminary 2D data set for El Paso County, which is the 2019 FEMA study that I mentioned earlier. Outside of that, there are floodplains from the first American Flood Data Services data set, which are basically digitized older floodplains, older FEMA maps. So that those are a predominant source of floodplain information throughout the entire region. And then there are some areas where the flood quilt shows some gaps. Those could potentially be filled through the Fathom dataset, which uses more global or really high level regional modeling assumptions to come up with the floodplain boundaries. So we'll try to understand how to best apply that data, and I understand there's an update to Fathom coming in the next month or so. So we do intend to utilize the updated version once it becomes available, and hopefully incorporate that into this, an updated flood quilt in the end. The hydrology for the area, this is just to show the main watershed boundaries. You can see this kind of the main watersheds. There's a large one for Lower Pecos. There's one large one down here for the Rio Grande Amistad Basin. These correspond to the two of the areas that we were looking to focus on for our stakeholder engagement, both in Presidio and Pecos, and then we have the El Paso County, of course, over here. And then this is just to show on the next slide, I'm showing the parcel data from TNRIS that was collected at the statewide level. This is a sort of to be used as a baseline for understanding parcel, understanding the different use classifications for given parcels. Each parcel is collected from the appraisal district and can be used to quantify potential damages from flooding. Can also be used to just better understand the makeup of land use throughout given areas. So in our initial review of this data set, we found there are some gaps in that as well. One notable one is in El Paso County. The parcels did not have an improvement value, so we will be looking to collect that information from the county appraisal district. The parcels that are shown without shading, without the pink shading, are the ones that don't have an improvement value, which in a lot of cases may make sense if there are no improvements, like buildings or other structures. So we're going to be focusing on those higher populated areas from the census designated place or incorporated places data set that Chris showed earlier, and use that to focus in on where where the potential major structured damages might occur, and if needed, we can reach out to the appraisal districts to request that information. So then lastly, for the public stakeholder survey and data collection, we're, as Chris mentioned, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing a survey to the stakeholders and the public, sort of two parts. The one part of that will be geared towards the community representatives and understanding which communities are participating in the FEMA NFIP program, and collecting other information at the community level, as well as from the public standpoint. We want to understand individual feedback related to concern on various flooding issues, as well as specific flood-prone areas that they may have identified from their own community. It may include neighborhoods that I mentioned earlier that may have access issues during a flood. It could be simple ponding issues nearby, but we'll be collecting all that and releasing that over the next couple of weeks. So with that, I was going to ask if Martin Bartlett could provide just a little input or brief summary of that approach, and then we'll hand it back to Chris for the schedule and meetings discussions. Martin, are you available to?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Brian, thanks so much. So one thing that I would share with everybody is, and Chris and Brian both kind of alluded to it, is the survey is in essentially two parts. What you see on the left side of the screen is really much more of a traditional survey that is designed to not ask for a wish list, but just kind of gauge community priorities. So you're not saying where is there flooding, but asking what kind of flooding are you most worried about? What are the types of improvements that are most interesting to you? Are you interested in, for example, flood control improvements which might blend in well with the local environment, or are you interested in things that are more about making sure that the flood control infrastructure is resilient in case of natural disaster? Just kind of gauging interests across the board. But then what you see on the right side of the screen is where we do very clearly ask for the wish list. Drop a pin on where it floods. If you know of a project that's coming up, drop a pin, tell us exactly what you know. So we're really kind of asking the questions in two pieces. So we hope that gives us a broad view of what the community priorities are. Brian?
Thanks, Martin. All right, so I guess with that, if I'll open up if there are any questions on what we presented so far related to tasks 1 and 2, any of the approaches or methodologies that we discussed. So if anyone has any questions, can talk about that before we move forward.
So I have a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, Gisela. It's okay.
Okay, so I have a question regarding the Phantom I guess software that you're using. What does it do? How does it work?
Yeah, so the Fathom data set is developed using large scale regional or more global modeling data that's downscaled, so that it's developed using statistical analysis of much larger generalized models, and then those results are downscaled to our region. They're considered very approximate, so they're in the ranking of like priority or quality of input data. They rank relatively low because they use very generalized inputs. They're really just to fill any gaps that may exist without requiring detailed modeling, but they do help to just sort of place, represent what the flood risk might look like, if a more detailed study were done. So it can't be used for regulatory purposes, but it can be used for planning or for developing, just communicating flood risk to communities even.
And I'll just add on to that one of our subcontractors, Aqua Strategies, is with Barney Austin. They're working closely with the Fathom team, so they are on a team together themselves, and so we've reached out to Barney and asked for some additional information about the methods used for that Fathom study and how it compares to the FEMA detailed models that were developed. And the information he gave us states that for the 100-year, for example, what they call an average hit rate, where it's, I guess, their models are consistent with the FEMA models, about 92% is the numbers that they gave. And they said for the 100-year, and for other flood return periods, they're in about a 90% hit rate. So they have done pretty extensive comparisons to the more detailed models to help develop this. And Barney mentioned that we should be expecting an updated data set within about a month's time frame, or maybe even a little bit less than that, a couple weeks. So
okay, yes. And you're going to be using LiDAR data for this, or to aid with this, I guess, with the interpolation, or what is that you're going to be using?
Well, the information that documents their methodology for Fathom developing these models, they mentioned using 30-meter resolution USGS topography. So yeah, that's what they've used primarily to develop these models.
I think that was what they used for the initial version, the initial iteration, and then the follow-up later this month. I think we'll be using a more detailed terrain.
Okay, thank you.
This is Dave. I'm just asking, when will the planning group see draft for task one?
Right. So that kind of leads into sort of a additional slide where we're going to be talking about schedule milestones from a high level. So as we mentioned earlier, the first deliverable is going to be the tech memo from Task 4C, which the first deliverable that's due to TWDB, I should clarify, and that's due on January 7th of 2022. And so since we had a little bit of a late start getting under contract, and we've been developing this survey and this geo database that goes along with the survey, which has taken also some time to get set up and get all the technical aspects of that web interface ready to use by the public. So we're going to be focusing on getting that deliverable to TWDB as a hard deadline on January 7th as a priority over getting the chapters drafted. So there was a suggested schedule in the scope of work or in the guidance provided by TWDB on when each chapter was suggested to be prepared to be reviewed by the flood planning group. But those were suggested deadlines. And in order to meet our goal of getting that tech memo ready by January 7th, we're proposing to actually draft that tech memo before we draft each chapter. And based on the feedback that we got from the flood planning group and from the Texas Water Development Board on that tech memo, we'll then use that to draft those chapters following the tech memo. And so we're expecting to get that draft tech memo to the flood planning group for review on December 3rd of 2021. And that would provide them 3 weeks for review and comments. So we'd begin comments back just before Christmas. So we wanted to make sure and get you that to review before the holidays. And then we'll be kind of under the gun during the holidays to get all the review comments incorporated into the draft that goes to Texas Water Development Board on the 7th of January. And then following, the feedback and receiving comments on that tech memo, we'll then draft those chapters 1 through 4 and provide that for review to the flood planning group in March of 2022. The overall draft of the flood plan, regional flood plan, is due to the TWDB in August of 2022. So we want to get that overall draft, which will be the remaining chapters and in the final tech memo to the RFPG by July. So we have about a month to get that reviewed and incorporate comments before the deadline in August. So that kind of is a general overview of how we plan to approach the schedule based on, sort of having a late start and getting under contract and how we plan to meet that schedule. Any questions?
Yes. Again, I know that you just described the process and having a late start. And last time we spoke, this is Sal Masood, by the way. Last time we spoke, we had talked about considering existing infrastructure. Well, the existing levees on the river, which is a big portion of the El Paso County, will they be considered, as part of the models? Or are you guys going to follow, the same fashion as FEMA's mapping? I just want to make sure so we don't have to be surprised by a map that reflects levees non-existent in December. We only have 2-3 weeks to review, and it might be significantly different if we see other results. I know we discussed having 2 options.
Right.
So, Chris, can I jump in on this one for a minute?
Sure, go for it.
All right. So one of the things Chris was talking about was we need to get updated hydrology on the river. And so I think the purpose of this particular plan is to identify where we have issues along the levees, not with the existing hydrology, but with using all the information that we're going to gather as part of the study to update what the hydrology should be. And then we'll identify outside of the certification process and outside of the regulatory mapping process, what are the needs in order to solve the problems. So we're not going to be changing anything that's regulatory in terms of defining risk. It'll be basically saying this is where we think, with the assumptions that the planning group agrees on, this is what we think could happen in the city, and we think we need to take these actions in order to prevent that from happening. But the first step is to get the hydrology right, because you can look at the river with one set of hydrology and you get a completely different answer than if you look at new hydrology. The thing you're talking about is FEMA has a rule that if you don't have a certified levee, you take the levee away. That's not an assumption that's going to be made as part of the study. This study is basically going to deal with getting the best hydrology possible, get everybody in the room and figure out who needs to do what, which is an interesting issue, and then proceeding. And Chris pointed out that we have a Rio Grande, he's about to show that we're going to have a Rio Grande committee, and those people are going to be in the room to basically define exactly what you're talking about. So if that's your concern, then you need to get on that particular committee, and Chris is going to talk about that soon.
I agree, and I will be. If there's that committee, I actually voted my interest last time that I will, and I am interested in being on that committee.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, I have a lot of experience on this issue, and I will be the part of the AECOM team addressing that particular issue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other comments, questions on the schedule? If not, we'll kind of give a general overview of the meetings that you see on this slide and talk a little bit about the subcommittees. All right. Well, then just to jump right in, we had initially planned on having general meetings such as these every 8 weeks with our proposal. However, we would like, that would only leave us one other general meeting before we have to draft that tech memo. So we're suggesting to compress our schedule a little bit and actually do meetings every 4 weeks of these general meetings, at least until we get through that tech memo. So through the end of the year, in January, we'd like to get in a meeting once a month following this meeting for general meetings. And we also have suggested developing these subcommittees that we've talked about a little bit. And in our proposal, we suggested these first 4 bullets as general subcommittees based on the information that's available in certain areas and based on their geographic location in the watersheds, and just based on the general types of issues that these different both areas and aspects of flooding experience. So one, we have El Paso County, where we mentioned AECOM's been involved in a lot of the studies. There's a lot of information available, a lot of models available. They've recently done some preliminary FEMA mapping models. So they have a master plan and costs developed for several projects, and they have recently completed projects. So they're kind of a different species than the rest of the region. So we're going to proposed to have one subcommittee for just the county, El Paso County, and then the Rio Grande Basin downstream of El Paso County, and some of those arroyos that flow into the Rio Grande would be a separate subcommittee. Those have a lot more rural communities and a different set of different types of flooding and a different approach to flooding, and there's going to be less information available and older flood maps. So we thought that'd be appropriate as a separate subcommittee. Then we've got the Rio Grande main stem flooding along the Texas-Mexico border and all the way up to New Mexico and the downstream limits, the Amistad Dam. And so that is a different type of flooding, and that involves the USIBWC levees, and it involves certain agreements with Mexico on what is the hydrology and how do you what are the river operations of the gates during flooding, and how do you communicate upstream with dams in New Mexico that control the Rio Grande flows. And so that has its own set of unique issues that we think warrant a separate subcommittee. As Jeff mentioned, he'll be heavily involved with that. We've worked a lot with EPC WID #1, the irrigation district, and also the Elephant Butte irrigation district on some studies analyzing the Rio Grande sedimentation and the maintenance of the sedimentation and the vegetation that can have an impact potentially on whether the 100-year flood is contained within the levees. And so just the management of those aspects will be a hot topic in that subcommittee. And then lastly, the Pecos River Basin, which we showed in an earlier slide, has sort of a separate watershed boundary and some unique flood types and communities in that area, which we felt also deserved its own subcommittee. And that'll be a different layer of public outreach that will be needed to kind of get the feedback on anecdotal or any other historical flood events, flood high water marks that might be available, because we might have to take a different approach if we don't have LIDAR or really detailed maps in those areas. So that was what we suggested in our scope of work, and we've added these last 2 bullets recently that we think would be helpful to have additional subcommittees related to specifically for flood mitigation and flood management goals, which we talked a little bit about earlier, and how we can be consistent throughout the region with how we approach floodplain management and development in our areas, and how we account for future impervious cover and climate change and that type of discussion. So that's a suggested new subcommittee. And then also in the end, we'll have to develop legislative recommendations. And we think it would be helpful to have a separate subcommittee from the start that is kind of fleshing out how to draft these regulations and who do we need to coordinate with to be successful at getting these pushed through, because we do have a lot of unique stakeholders with being right on the border of Mexico and New Mexico. We want to make sure that we're considering all the political aspects involved, and some of that might involve some detailed strategies on how to coordinate and how to draft these recommendations. So these are the subcommittees that we're proposing to be implemented, and we would like to get some feedback if anybody is opposed to certain to this organization of subcommittees, and hopefully we can get started on having people sign up for these different subcommittees, so that we can get some of these meetings scheduled here in the near future, because like we said, we're going to be under a tight deadline of getting this draft tech memo out by December 2nd. And so the sooner we can get these subcommittees established and get members joined and on a list for each of these, then we can set up meetings and we can dive into some of the more detailed aspects of each one of these issues. And lastly, just before I kind of open it up one more time to any other questions or comments, I'll just mention that we do have some roadshow meetings that we plan on doing in El Paso, Presidio, and Pecos. I don't know, Martin from Barracuda, if you have any sort of real quick highlights on what we can expect from those. Oh, you're on mute actually, Martin.
Thank you for that. Sorry about that. Just to remind everyone, I mean, this planning area, we crunched the numbers. It's bigger than Indiana, so I mean, it really is critically important that we get out there. Obviously, we cannot get to every community, but at the very least, we think being present in places like Presidio and Pecos, given the fact that they are in different watersheds, have very different realities, will also, as much as they serve as tools to get people engaged, to get people's feedback at the roadshow meetings, it also just serves as an opportunity for us to kind of build buzz about the planning process.
Do you have any tentative dates for those yet?
Brian, do you have those on our sort of internal schedule for? I know that we have certain minimum, I guess, announcements times that we have to meet, and so I think that minimum is 2 weeks for those roadshow meetings. But we're going to try to give a little bit more notice than that if possible. So I don't know, Brian, do you have that up? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
I think the time frame, the approximate time frame was going to be kind of mid-September or October to kind of.
Is that for all three of them?
They'll be back to back. I mean, within our compressed time frame, we're going to have to. I think the schedule is going to be different from what was in the original proposal, probably. But to compress them, they'll probably be maybe spread out by a week or two each one.
In that September-October window?
Yes.
Okay. Can we also get a copy of the additional topics slide distributed to us since that wasn't in the original
Absolutely.
packet?
Yes.
Okay.
Just wanted to note that in Presidio, there isn't a really large facility. I'm thinking that maybe we can use the annex from the commissioners. That might be a possibility, but I mean, obviously, we don't know what the volume of people will be. But if that is a concern, then we may need to consider moving.
Hey, Annette, what about the facility that's where the library's at?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. The Presidio Activity Center. No, I lied. That'll be a perfect spot. It serves as a gymnasium as well, so that would be just the same as the facility that we used in Marfa. So we'll take care of it that way.
Hey, Richard, I have a question. This is Dave again, and I hate to be bugging on this. In the sketch that you guys gave us for conceptual schedule, you kind of showed that tasks 1 through 4B would be done before the technical memo is submitted. And now what I'm hearing proposed is that those are going to be done after the technical memo is published and accepted. Do you have a comment on that?
So the chapters don't need to be completed before the tech memo, but the data collection beforehand does, and to the extent possible. The tech memo is just our kind of midway checkpoint to make sure all the regions are on track to complete. With the original conceptual schedule that was sent out, that was assuming that work started back in March or April or so, but we didn't get the contractor until June or so. So the conceptual schedule that was originally sent out, assume that it will be a bit more compressed, as well as the task for B for the identification of projects, and 5 kind of blend together with the identification and evaluation. So those will kind of flow in and out around the tech memo. But the chapters themselves, the written chapters, can be completed after.
Okay, should we, just a question, should we be seeing a draft maybe of each of those chapters along with the draft for the technical memo?
Again, that by the technical consultants timeline here, they say draft chapters 1 through 4 for March 2022, which is fine. And so you will see the draft chapters, but the chapters, again, don't need to be done by the tech memo. It's the data that goes behind the tech behind these that needs to be completed.
Okay, so for us to see drafts in March of 2022, 3 months after the tech memo is okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
While I am speaking, I do want to point out something about the subcommittees. I put something in the meeting chat. I'm not sure if it went through to everybody. Mine kind of disappeared. But according to the rules, I do want to point out, if you guys do choose to do regional-based subcommittees, there are 2 kind of major stipulations around regional subcommittees. Is that ideally they're formed around Huck 8 basins to the extent possible, as well as this group is largely formed around interest categories, because each of you represent different interest categories. So if you're looking at a smaller region, a sub-region of the Upper Rio Grande, that all one of each of those interest categories of members need to be represented on that subcommittee, which, taken lightly, can present some logistical challenges if there are multiple sub-region subcommittees.
Gotcha. Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. I did see your chat message come through. So hopefully everyone else got that as well. And so, yeah, that could throw a wrench a little bit in what we've proposed here. We'll have to consider that and whether that makes these same subcommittees possible. I kind of mentioned why we selected the committees we did. They do have interest groups, I think, in each of these subcommittees. I think it is relevant to a particular set of interests by the members of those communities, and they are based roughly on Huck watersheds. I don't know, Brian, do you want to go back to that slide we have of the Huck watersheds? I don't know, were those Huck, which Hucks? Oh, it's Huck 6, okay. So if they're required to be based on Huck 8, you know, we're a little bit different from that. I guess we'd have to overlay them and see how they line up with Huck 8s. But, you know, I do think that they meet certain interest categories. But yeah, I can't say without kind of going through this in detail whether that's going to be an issue for subcommittees that we have set up. But that is good feedback. That's the kind of feedback we were hoping to get at these meetings. So are there any other comments about the potential subcommittees?
I have a comment about the slide display. I'm not sure what motivates slides to be up when the person's talking about them or not, but there were like 3 slides that came up when somebody was actually talking about them, and all the rest of the time there was an incorrect slide. So I don't know how we solve that.
Dave, I wonder if perhaps it might be on your side, because it was at least on my side, it's following with the presenter, so it's not behind.
So it must be doing something about loading, huh?
Yes.
I also had the same issue as Dave.
I'm gonna blame it on where you are.
Well, that's interesting. I'm out in the boonies, I guess. Maybe okay. Enough said.
I was also struggling to get the correct slides. Would it be possible for you to send out the slides beforehand every time we meet?
Yeah, so I have the they're embedded in the agenda. So you'll see the hyperlink and the slides will be there. There were a few that we presented that were not, so I'll get those out to everyone.
Yeah, the only one that I saw that wasn't already distributed was the additional topics.
Okay. So for the subcommittees, also, Richard, I believe that you had informed us that these are also going to be requiring the same stipulations for Open Meetings Act, and so we'll need to post these meetings 7 days before. And if we have any backup materials, we'll have to send those 3 days before. Am I correct?
Yes. So the rules also state that each committee or subcommittee must follow all Open Meetings Act guidelines. So that does require the postings, applicable notice requirements as possible. And just one more point to point out that if you tie subcommittees not to a geography sub-region, for instance, like task 3B or 8, those particular subcommittees don't need to follow the stipulation of one interest category represented each.
So I'm assuming there's going to be a revision of the subcommittees then, based on the comments that were made.
We will go through and reconsider these subcommittees based on those comments. We'll see if it ends up being a significant revision. We might, like I said, we base some of these on Huck 6 watersheds. The Huck 8, might be just as be able to break it out in very similar regions. So we'll have to just consider everything and make sure that we're meeting all of the technical requirements. But we'll try to keep them loosely based on these same regions and concepts if we can. But yeah, I guess they're not final. That's why we wanted to just propose them at this meeting and get some feedback, and hopefully we can get some interest or get some people to sign up for, assuming that these will loosely stay the same. It would be nice to know how many people and which people are interested in these subcommittees, just to keep the ball rolling so we don't get stuck until, you know, the next meeting. If there's any interest, you know, we encourage you all to send us an email. You can reach out to Annette, or I don't know, Annette, if you prefer Gilbert or AECOM to just receive those emails directly. What, do you have any preference on how we receive feedback on each subcommittee and start setting up that list of who's interested in these, and that'll all just be qualitative at this point, to help us gauge, okay, how many people are going to be involved in these, and maybe it makes sense to combine two of these subcommittees into one based on the level of interest. But yeah, what's your preference on the contact person for that, the subcommittee emails and getting that interest?
So what we can do, we can do it in a survey form, and that way we can put out each of these subcommittees and then ask people to identify their preference. And then when we get the results, I think that might be maybe more efficient for you, so that way you're not bombarded with the emails. The one thing though, I think, just to also get back to this Subcommittee Open Meetings Act item, with these subcommittees, because the suspensions will be lifted as of September 1, there will be some element where people are going to have to be present. And so it's just going to complicate the matter a little bit more, because we won't be working in this platform solely. So I don't know if in order to meet the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, we would need the chair to be physically present, and the others could be virtual. So that's how I'm interpreting it. And if Richard sees something different, he'll let us know. But that's a consideration where if we can, in the forum, I'll ask if anybody wants to be, which committees they would like to be on. And then if anybody would like to serve as the chair, I think that if it's possible, just for logistics, we could have chairs be those that are here in El Paso. And then that way we can ensure that we've just got a few people meeting physically, but the others can be participating virtually. Richard, am I missing anything?
The Open Meetings Act guidelines, yes, the emergency declaration will be ending on September 1st. And that some of the clauses.
Let me go ahead and take the screen so I can show the agenda, if that's okay. Did anybody have any questions for ECOM? Okay. Where did it go? Okay. Okay, Chair Martinez.
Thank you.
Omar, are you? Okay, there you go.
Yes, ma'am.
That's fine. Just wanted to.
Okay. Did we already? Yeah, we already talked about task number. Did we already do item number 8? Yes, right? That
yes,
was everything.
We included both. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. All right. Item number 9, discussion of old business. Annette, did we have anything pending for today?
The forever pending website, but we just needed to. It's ready to go, and so we'll go live tomorrow. So I'll be sending out the website to everyone, so you can take a look and see the information as it's being presented, because that will be critical for you all to view the material. So just be on the lookout for that.
Awesome. All right. Item number 10, general public comments. Do we have any members of the public with us? Okay. Hearing none. Next item, 11, consider the date and agenda items for next meeting.
And I believe that based on what Gilbert had sent me, we've already got the next meeting established. Is that correct, Gilbert?
Yes, what I've done is I sent out a series of meetings out, so it should be on your schedule there.
Okay, so it's going to be 8 weeks from today, and that's going to be.
Wasn't there a comment made that we need to start having meetings every 4 weeks now instead of 8 weeks?
There was, and we'll look at that, Dave. Let me resend that one out. But the one we had scheduled for the next was it was 8 weeks from that, but it was like in October.
Yeah, that
but
one
let
was.
Let us resend that out to you, Annette.
Okay.
Are we going to do it in 4 weeks, Chris? Or were we talking about?
Yeah, I think we'll probably be targeting the beginning of September, either the 1st or the 2nd.
Yeah, that's Labor Day weekend, guys, so probably not a good time.
Okay, maybe earlier that week. I'd rather do it earlier than later. Well, maybe the 6th, right? Well, the 6th would be Labor Day, right? So,
right. But how about the 9th on that Thursday?
We can go earlier if you need to.
So Wednesday before that Labor Day weekend, is that still too close to the weekend? Do you think a lot of people might be out on that Wednesday, September 1st?
It's you guys' choice.
I think people will be out on Friday more than likely, but not Wednesday.
I do have a conference that week, but
let's shoot for Thursday the 9th.
Thursday the 9th.
If that works for you guys, that was what was commented.
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out. So I've got conferences back to back the 1st and 2nd week of September. I'm just thinking that if we the way that I envisioned this meeting happening, since it would be a hybrid, is if we Omar has offered to utilize the El Paso County Water Improvement District, and so if Omar's there, he's the chair. Anyone else who wants to be present can be there. I can be present virtually, and so we can keep with that meeting on the 9th. I'll just be doing it from Austin, if everybody's okay with that. I'll hang out with Richard. How's that? Is everybody okay with that?
9 September at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Sure.
And where's it going to be?
Omar, is that okay if we have it at your location, El Paso County Water Improvement District?
Give me 1 second. I'm looking at the schedule. You know what? I apologize. The 9th we would not be able to host you on the 9th.
Okay, then we'll just do this. I just won't be present at that meeting. We need to get this going. So we'll have the meeting on September 9th at 9 a.m. and we can have it here at the Council of Governments.
Why don't we have it on the 2nd?
Well, it's better.
Have a conference, right?
Yeah, it's better that we have it on the 9th. I can modify my. Yes, sir.
Last time when you sent that little table where people chose the better dates, and then that kind of worked for everybody, because I do have an engagement on the 9th about the same time that I cannot cancel. It's already pre-scheduled, and I would hate to miss this next meeting.
Why don't we revert back to before Labor Day on that Wednesday that you were suggesting? How does that work for everybody?
I can't do Wednesday the 1st.
Okay, all right.
I mean, unless you want to try, is it too much if we try to do August 30th?
August 8th worked for me, but not the 9th. The 8th would work.
The 30th of August is a suggested date?
Yeah, I can't do August the 30th. I'll be out, but you'll be out that week on a conference, and so will it be too much if we move it back to August the 26th? That's 1 weeks from now.
I'm okay with moving it further back, but I know the time crunch. So how about we do this, like Sal said, let me send out that doodle poll, and it's going to be just a bunch of days, and let's just see what we can come up with. And if, again, if we need to, if for some reason everybody is amenable to the 8th or the 10th of September, then that's fine. I can modify my obligations. That's not a problem. So I'll send out the doodle poll, and we'll see what date comes up as everyone's availability, the majority.
Gilbert, can the contractor support all those dates, any of those dates?
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry.
Oh, for any product that you need to have ready for us or anything that you want to present, is that enough time if we should select something in late August?
I think we should. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem with that, the week of the 23rd through the 27th, if that's what everyone's most available.
Right.
We should be able to accommodate that. I know there is a TFMA technical summit that week, the 24th through the 27th, so there might be a lot of folks at that conference that week, but I guess it's just conference season now. They're all starting back up again, so we'll rely on the majority of when you all can make it, what date works best for everybody. And yeah, it shouldn't be a problem for AECOM to accommodate whatever that ends up being.
Okay, let's make sure we include that late August window then.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of dates on this doodle poll, so.
Okay, good.
All right, so then, so Chair Martinez, it's to be determined for our next date.
All right. So having said that, let's move on to the next item, adjourning. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Sal first. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion passes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.